Okay, so just to emphasize a couple of things in this on this slide here. Single space within paragraphs, double space between, and also where it says place the date 2 inches from the top or one blank line below the letterhead, whichever is lower. Sometimes you have some letterhead that takes up what seems to be a fourth or a third of the page, and so you want to get that first line of information, the date, up as high as possible. You don't want to overlap or interfere with the letterhead. Leave 2 to 7 blank lines between the date and inside address. And you might well wonder, well, 2 to 7, I mean, what's going to be my guide for that, to knowing whether it ought to be the low end or the high end of that range? And the answer is what looks best on the page. You know, you want your letter to be attractive. It needs to look professional. It needs to, and human beings have an innate sense of balance. You know if something's is something out of alignment, and something's wrong, and so it's or a picture, is crooked. So we see those things, and so it is with letters like this. If it looks to be if the text, the body is too low on the page, or too high and leaves too much space at the bottom, people notice that, and they interpret that as being maybe a lack of sense of detail, of attention to detail, or maybe just a lack of concern or lack of knowledge. So you don't want that. You want everything you do to speak of your professionalism and your concern and care. So just be aware of that. Decide whether to use full block, where all lines start at the left margin. This is more common, or modified block, where the date and the closing lines start at the center of the letter. Most business letters use full block. I'll point out something maybe when we look at an example in just a moment. Allow 3 blank lines between the complimentary close and the writer's name. And by 3 blank lines, that means that once you say sincerely, or yours truly, or the best, or something like that, or best wishes, and that's your complimentary close, then you will actually hit the return 4 times to put 3 full spaces in between the complimentary close and your name. Okay, here's a business letter you might want to look at. There's a letterhead. It just demonstrates the spacing. There's the inside address. That's the person, of course, who it's going to. And this demonstrates here a full block pattern, because you've got this Ms. LaTanya Williams, healthcare specialist. That inside address is and the date are right there in the on the far left margin. By the way, I mentioned in class that where it shows the subject, I don't see that very often myself, but I'd say there's a place for it, particularly if you're responding to someone else's request for information. And that seems to be the case here. Then you see at the close here, again, if this was a modified block design, then you would see sincerely and Sharon Montoya. That would start over there in the middle of the page, about where you see the red, 1 blank line, 3 blank lines, that kind of thing. Okay, requesting information in action. We're now going to look at the format of certain specific types. Now here's what I'd like for you to do, and that's just realize with each one of these there's an opening, there's a body, and then there's a close. And so you want to be thinking about what should distinguish and be included in these amounts. And once we get then to the negative letters, you'll hopefully have a better framework for thinking in terms of how to design those. If you've got the basic format down for positive letters, it's going to be easier when we get to the other ones. In an opening, ask a question or issue a polite command. This is just one to get some attention, and pique people's interest. Avoid long explanations that precede the main idea. They ask you a question here, particularly if, again, these are, in this particular case, you're writing a letter to a company that's selling a product, and you're asking them for information on that. That's going to be a request, but it's going to be a request they'll receive very very positively. They like to answer questions about their products because it means potential sales. Avoid long explanations that precede the main idea. Go ahead and get to your point. It's a funny thing sometimes. The people say, "I'd like to ask you to do this. I'd like to thank you." When I hear that, I want to say, "Well, then go ahead. I'm all ears." In other words, don't say, "I'd like to thank you." Just say, "Thank you." Oh, I'd like to ask you. We'd like to ask you to speak at our. Why don't you say, "Would you please be our guest speaker at an event?" Go ahead and ask the question. In the body, explain your purpose and provide details. Express questions in parallel form. Number them if appropriate. This is true really of any list that you've got there. It just helps that person to take it all in, to organize it, and of course then to give you the response that you're looking for. To elicit the most information, use open-ended questions rather than yes or no questions. And of course, suggest reader benefits if possible. If you're asking someone, for instance, from a local business to come speak to CEO, you might want to tell the students that, or tell this person that you're going to have 50 or 60 prospective customers in this group, maybe even a potential intern in this group. And in the closing, state specifically but courteously the action you wish to be taken. When you ask someone to do something, to volunteer, for instance, to speak at the Marketplace Faith Forum, or to assist in some way, you still want to think in terms of what good it does them, but realize that you're asking them in many cases to do something for you, and so you want to to let them know what's needed. Set an end date. Tell them that it would really help you to organize the event if you can hear from them by a certain date. You want to be courteous. Realize that you're making a request of them, and even though it may be a request they're glad to hear, glad to receive, it's still going to involve some sacrifice or some action on their part, and you want to keep that in mind. Avoid cliche endings like "thank you for your cooperation." Oh, what are some of those other ones? Thanking you in advance or something like that. Show your appreciation, but try to avoid the same phrases that are all too common. Make it easy for the receiver to respond. Tell them how you want to, rather than just say, "Please contact me." Do you want them to email you, to reply to this email? Do you want them to call you? And then you make sure you've got the contact information in there. And of course, it's easy. Makes it easy to them to respond if you tell them that you're going to follow up with a phone call in the next couple of days, just to make sure that that they've got the information that they need. Here's an example of a routine request. There's a before version, and in class we walked down through this example. I gave students some time to read through it and then to suggest some changes. And what I encouraged students to do was to look back over those preceding slides where we actually identified what should be included in the opening, what should be included, the form and the content really of the opening, the form and content of the body, and then of course the form and content of the close. So if you look back through those notes and then you look at this this letter, I'm confident you'll see some things that could be improved, and that's what you see, as a matter of fact, in the rewrite. That is the after version here. Notice they get right to the point. They don't beat around the bush. They then in the body explain more specifically what their needs are, and then they use graphic highlighting here to ask the questions that they need answers to make an informed decision about this product. And then notice, although the original letter doesn't really give a deadline date, whoever's rewriting this made one up to indicate that this is really what you would need to do, to ask for a deadline, an end date, a due date for their response, and of course show that the reason you need this response, and it will help you make a decision, a timely decision on whether this software is a good fit for you. Okay, let's talk about order letters. Order letters, of course, are where you are submitting an order to a supplier of a particular good. And as you'll see, we have opening, body, and close. In the opening, use order language to identify the message. Get right to the point. Tell them what it is that you want to order, or that you're placing an order if you may be a number of different items. And so you'll, again, as you see here, please send these items from your spring catalog. It's you'll need to provide whatever information is necessary or helpful to the vendor, to the supplier, so that they can fulfill your order and do it correctly. You certainly want to take out of, don't leave anything to chance with respect to getting the order exactly right. It's really your job to do that. You name the information source, a particular catalog, for instance, or maybe a magazine where you saw the product, so that then they know two things. They know that you've got some information already about the product, and they can then see whether that information, it could well be that that's an old catalog or an old magazine article, and that in fact the product has changed. The body, list items vertically, provide quantity, order number, complete description, unit price, total price. Prevent mistakes by providing as much information as possible. You may have a product description, but you've also got a product number, and you've got the price, and again the catalog number that you're drawing the price from, shipping, if there's sales taxes. Make sure that you provide all the information you can, so that they will know what you were looking at. They don't want to disappoint you, and they don't want you to be disappointed. And so providing as much information as possible to get that order exactly right is the way to ensure that the order is correct. And then closing, tell how you plan to pay for the merchandise. Tell when you would like to receive the goods. If you've got a special deadline, let them know about that. And of course, express appreciation. You might even, they've got your contact information. It's probably not necessary in most cases to say, please let me know if you have any questions or comments, that kind of thing. On the other hand, you're going to close with something, and express an appreciation for their assistance is always a nice touch. Okay, let's stop here and go to direct claim letters on the next